BRICS was an attack on the dollar. And I said, you want to play that game, I'm going to put tariffs on all of your product. The dollar is king.
Standing against the dollar means standing against the United States. And standing against the United States means standing against the most powerful military, economy, and financial system on Earth. That's why, when Saddam Hussein rejected the dollar, he was hanged. When Muammar Gaddafi tried to replace it, he was killed. And when Iran built its own oil exchange, it was crushed under sanctions. Every nation that tried to escape the dollar's shadow has faced collapse, isolation, or war. But the question is, why? Why does the United States have the kind of power that even Russia, China, or Europe can't fully resist? Why does every sanction from Washington shake the entire world, while the same action from any other country barely makes the news? To understand this, you have to look at what money really means, and how America turned it into a weapon. In today's world, sanctions are more powerful than bombs. When the United States sanctions a country, it doesn't need to send troops, launch missiles, or drop nuclear warheads. It just cuts them off from the dollar, and that single act is enough to paralyze entire nations. Banks freeze, imports stop, food and medicine vanish. Because almost every international trade, every loan, every transaction runs through the American financial system. That system that clears those transactions is called SWIFT, a secure global messaging network that connects banks across 200 countries. If you want to send money from India to France or from Brazil to Japan, your transaction will, in most cases, touch an American bank somewhere in between. That's where the United States has leverage. If Washington decides you're the enemy, your accounts are locked, your companies can't pay, your people can't trade. It's like pulling the plug on an economy's oxygen supply. Economists call it a financial nuclear bomb. No explosion, just silence. Now imagine that same power in the hands of another country. Would it work the same way? If Nepal or South Africa or even India announced sanctions tomorrow, would the world shake? No, because no other currency controls global trade the way the dollar does. So how did the dollar rise so high? And why do even the most powerful nations still depend on it? To answer that, we have to go back, far before Wall Street and oil, to the roots of money itself. Once upon a time, people didn't use money. They used barter, rice for wheat, goats for cloth, tools for copper. It worked, but only in small circles. Barter dies when trade grows. Because what happens if you want rice, but the farmer doesn't need your goats? Trade stops. So humanity invented value you could carry: metal. Gold, silver, and copper became the first universal languages of trade. They didn't spoil, they didn't rust, but they were heavy, dangerous to carry, and easy to steal. So people found a smarter way. Instead of carrying gold, they left it with a trusted merchant and took a signed paper that promised, this note equals this much gold. That piece of paper became early currency. Centuries later, China formalized it. Real paper money backed by government trust. Marco Polo saw it and brought the idea to Europe. From there, the concept spread. And by the 1800s, Britain's pound sterling ruled the financial world. Each pound represented a fixed amount of gold. It was called the gold standard. You could exchange paper for real metal. Trust was tied to something physical, something solid. For decades, that system worked. Britain built an empire on it. Most world trade was done in pounds. But everything changed when war arrived. World War I drained Britain of gold and filled America's vaults instead. While Europe was torn apart, the United States sold weapons, food, and fuel to both sides and demanded payment in gold. By the end of the war, the US held most of the world's reserves. After World War II, it held even more. the rest of the world was in ruins. Factories destroyed, economies shattered. So in 1944, 44 nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to rebuild the global system. There, America made its move. The proposal was simple, but revolutionary. Every country would back its currency not by gold, but by the US dollar, and America would back its dollar by gold at $35 per ounce. That meant if France, Japan, or Germany wanted gold, they could hand in dollars and get the real thing. It sounded fair, and no one else had enough gold to argue. The deal was sealed, and the Bretton Woods Agreement crowned the dollar as the world's official reserve currency. America also created the World Bank and IMF, giving loans to rebuild Europe, all in dollars. The Marshall Plan sent billions of US dollars overseas, and those dollars never left. They circulated, they built economies, they built dependence. For the first time in history, one nation's currency became the world's currency. But America wasn't done. After the wars, another form of gold began to shape the world: black gold. Oil. Every car, every plane, every factory ran on it, and whoever controlled oil controlled the modern world. In the 1940s, American oil companies helped Saudi Arabia discover vast reserves. They built the wells, the pipelines, and the refineries. Saudi Arabia had oil, but America had the technology and the military might to protect it. Then, in 1945, a quiet meeting took place between US President Franklin D. Roosevelt and the Saudi king aboard a ship in the Suez Canal. Their handshake reshaped the century. The deal was simple. America would protect Saudi Arabia, and in return, Saudi Arabia would sell oil only in US dollars. That was the birth of the petrodollar. From that moment, every nation that needed oil needed dollars first. If Japan wanted oil, it had to buy dollars. If India wanted oil, it had to buy dollars. Even if France traded with Brazil, somewhere in that transaction, dollars moved. The United States didn't just create demand for its money, it made it essential for survival. Oil became the anchor, the dollar became the chain. But behind the scenes, there was a problem. America was printing more money than it could cover with gold. Wars in Korea and Vietnam, military bases across the world, the balance was breaking. By the late 1960s, countries like France started demanding gold for their dollars. Ships were sent to New York to retrieve bullion. America's vaults began to empty. Then came 1971. President Richard Nixon appeared on television and announced,
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be.
That temporary decision never ended. The promise was broken. The dollar was no longer backed by anything. Not gold, not silver, only trust. The world was shocked, but there was no alternative. Because oil was still traded in dollars, loans were still made in dollars, and every central bank still held dollar reserves. The system didn't collapse, it evolved into something even more powerful. Now, without the gold link, the dollar was free to expand infinitely, and America used that freedom strategically. When countries needed oil, they bought it in dollars. Those dollars went to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia then reinvested them back into US assets, treasury bonds, banks, real estate. The loop was complete. This recycling of oil money became known as petrodollar recycling. It strengthened the dollar's dominance and funded America's growth. But not everyone played along. Some leaders saw it as financial slavery and tried to escape. In 2000, Iraq's Saddam Hussein switched oil sales from dollars to euros. 3 years later, he was gone. In 2009, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency to unite the continent and sell oil in gold instead of dollars. 2 years later, NATO forces bombed Libya. Gaddafi was killed in the desert. In 2012, leaked Hillary Clinton emails revealed that Gaddafi's plan for a new African currency was seen as a major threat to the US dollar. It was never allowed to happen. Iran tried to do the same. They built their own oil exchange, the Iranian Oil Bourse, planning to use euros and other currencies. Soon after, they faced devastating sanctions that cut them off from the global banking system. These are not coincidences. Every time a nation tries to step away from the dollar, chaos follows, because the dollar is more than currency, it's control. Here's how that control works. Most global banks hold accounts with American banks, called correspondent accounts, to settle trades. If the US cuts those links, money stops flowing. Imports stop, exports stop, debt payments stop. That's what sanctions do. Primary sanctions forbid US companies from doing business with a country. Secondary sanctions punish foreign companies that continue trading with that country. So when the US sanctions Iran or Russia, even European and Asian companies pull out, not because they want to, but because they fear losing access to the American market. That's why American sanctions hit harder than anyone else's. They don't just isolate the target, they scare everyone else into compliance. And behind every sanction, there's one message. The dollar decides who survives. But in the 21st century, new cracks are forming. Nations are tired of being controlled by another country's currency, and slowly, they're fighting back. China has reduced its holdings of US bonds and increased trade in yuan. Russia now sells oil in rubles and yuan instead of dollars. India and the UAE have signed deals to trade in their own currencies. Saudi Arabia and China recently completed their first oil transaction in yuan. And the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are planning a shared alternative currency called the BRICS unit, possibly symbolized as beta. Even so, experts say replacing the dollar isn't easy. It's not just about printing money, it's about building trust. The world trusts the dollar because the US has deep financial markets, stable laws, and military reach that protects trade routes. A new system would need all that, and that takes decades. Still, the resistance is growing. And even inside America, some leaders see what's coming. When reports spread that international blocs were discussing a new global settlement currency, former President Donald Trump made his position clear. He said, "There's no way I'll ever allow a new international currency to replace the US dollar."
My economic people, but I like the dollar. I'm very strong on the dollar. And anybody who wants to deal in dollars, they have an advantage over people that aren't. You wouldn't have the dollar as your currency anymore. You wouldn't have a world domination by the dollar.
Because he knew losing the dollar means losing the empire. The United States doesn't just print money, it prints power. And as long as oil, trade, and technology are priced in dollars, that power continues. But power built on paper has its limits. When you weaponize your currency too often, others start finding ways to live without it. When the US banned Russia from SWIFT after the Ukraine war, it hurt Russia, but it also shook global confidence. Countries saw how quickly one government could freeze another nation's reserves. That fear is fueling alternatives, digital currencies, local trade systems, even gold and crypto. Still, the road to dethrone the dollar is long, because it's not just America's currency, it's the world's habit. Contracts, debts, reserves, loans, all built on the dollar's backbone. And habits like that don't die overnight. So where does this story end? The dollar became global because the US built a system others couldn't match. Deep markets, safe routes, strong courts, and a military that guards them all. That web gave America control, and it gave the world convenience. But convenience always comes with a cost. Today, as more countries seek independence, that web is stretching. Maybe one day it will snap. Maybe one day the world will trade in another language, yuan, gold, or something digital. But for now, the dollar still speaks louder than bombs. It's not backed by gold anymore. It's backed by belief and fear. Belief that the system won't collapse. Fear of what happens if it does. The dollar's throne wasn't built on paper. It was built on power. And every empire built on power eventually faces a choice: adapt or fall. Until that day comes, the message remains the same. For every nation, every leader, and every dream of financial freedom, standing against the dollar means standing alone.